Welcome to Community Keynotes. This program, presented by the Safe Community Coalition, was recorded live at Fairfax County Public Schools McLean High School in McLean, Virginia. In this program, Julie Lythcott-Haims, former Stanford University dean and author of the book How to Raise an Adult, discusses what she calls the overparenting trap, with a particular focus on affluent communities. She uses her own experience as a parent, university dean, and member of the affluent Palo Alto, California community to share her views on the causes and effects of this form of parenting.
I want you to know right up front, I did not set out to be a parenting expert. And for that matter, I'm not particularly interested in parenting. And I'm sure some of you are saying, am I in the right talk? What am I doing here? I came out in the rain to hear this lady. What am I here for? What I mean is, across my career, from law to academia to life now as a writer, I've been interested in humans having the chance to become themselves. And I've been interested in trying to do something about the obstacles that can get in the way of any human becoming themselves. And it's just that there's a type of parenting. I mean, remember when we called it child rearing? Now we've put ourselves at the heart of it. Parenting, there's a type of parenting these days that's really kind of getting in the way of a kid having a chance to become themselves. So while we're concerned, and rightly so, about parents who neglect their kids, aren't involved enough in their kids' upbringing and education, we need to also be concerned about what's happening at the other end of the spectrum. Dare I say, this end of the spectrum, where parents are so very involved, keeping a close eye on kids at all times, GPS tracking them like they're endangered rhino in the Serengeti, hovering over every happening, micromanaging their kids every moment, steering them rather forcefully toward a small number of colleges and careers, where it's as if parents are so afraid the kid won't succeed in life on their own that they end up doing much of what constitutes living life for their kid. Now, those parents aren't neglecting kids in the traditional use of the term neglect, but they actually are neglecting their obligation to raise a kid to healthy, thriving, independent adulthood. I just said those parents, but I should have said we parents, because over the course of the many years, I've been mom to my two kids, Sawyer, my 16-year-old high school junior, and Avery, my 14-year-old freshman daughter. I can see that I've fallen into the very overparenting trap I've written about. In the aftermath of the recent teen suicides in my town, Palo Alto, I've been asked to participate in panel discussions to try to unpack what's going on with our youth and what we can do about it. My fellow panelists are always amazing people, physicians, mental health clinicians, professors, young adults, teens, parents, and they talk about the need to destigmatize mental health issues and make resources more readily available for kids in schools and in the community, and expand those resources to accommodate more kids, and outright build the facilities we currently don't have. Such as where I live, there isn't an adolescent psych ward. They have to be transported an hour away if they're experiencing that degree of acute distress. When it's my turn to speak on these panels, I say, you know what, I agree with all of that. We need all of that. And the good news is, other than destigmatizing the mental health issue, the rest of it can be solved with money, I say, which is great, because no one has more money than us, I say, to a community in Palo Alto. So let's use all of our money and get those resources. What I want to know is why so many of our kids need these resources in the first place. And that's what I'm here to talk with you about tonight. Why do so many of our children, the few who have taken their lives, the many more who contemplate it, the many, many more who regularly feel some degree of emptiness, helplessness, and hopelessness, and the too many to mention who are under inordinate stress and pressure too often, why do they experience such pain? I know from the whispers, wherever I travel, that this is not just a Palo Alto problem. Lord knows there is no simple answer to the question I'm asking. Every kid, every family, every circumstance is different. They feel pressured by different things. They worry about different things. They feel support and encouragement in different places. But just because there's no simple answer doesn't mean we just sit here wringing our hands, staying the course while praying that our child won't have a breakdown or worse, or saying it only happens to those kids, whomever we might have in mind when we say that. I guarantee you, not a single one of us is trying to contribute to the crazy, the frenzy, the emptiness. None of us is trying to harm our kids or their friends. Still, instead of saying, oh, we're not doing that, we must, as the grown-ups in their community, be invested in what's going on with our young and why, and be willing to understand, to investigate the role we do in fact play in creating this community consciousness and set of expectations that is crushing so many of our kids. We must be willing to interrogate what we, parents, are saying and doing as individuals, as a family, as a community, that contributes to an environment that makes it difficult for our kids to see a way through. Even if we're legitimately not a part of the problem, we can still be a part of the solution. We must, in the words of the organization Challenge Success, do you know it? You had Madeline Levine here 2 years ago. Who knows Challenge Success? It's a nonprofit founded at Stanford by Denise Pope and Madeline Levine. We must, in the words of Challenge Success, and I'm on their board, by the way, disclaimer, I care about them. We must challenge what we mean by success. How? It's as much about our attitude, our presence with our kids, the language we use, the way we show up in our kids' friends' lives and our friends' kids' lives. It requires us to parent not out of fear that they'll fail at this magnificent future we have in mind for them, but instead to parent from a place of utter love. It's not anti-rigor. Of course we have high expectations for our kids, but our egos and our need to be needed must play no part in how we raise our kids. We need to be as proud of our kids' wellness, their character, as we are of their achievement, genuinely. I know what I know because as a college dean at Stanford, that highly selective big university right up the street from me, where everyone in my town is hell-bent on their kids going. At Stanford, being a dean, working with thousands of other people's grown kids, it was kind of like I got a glimpse of the future that scared me. And I'm running back to the present to write this book, to warn those of us still raising kids that the path many of us are traveling, myself included, it leads to a cliff up ahead, and we must go another way. I knew thousands of students well in my 10 years as dean, and although they were universally regarded as some of the world's best and brightest, in terms of high school GPAs and test scores and other achievements, they were somehow inexplicably more and more accomplished each year. You know what I mean? Yet with each year I noticed more students could tell you what they'd done, but not so much why they'd done it, except to meet their parents' expectations, except to get into the right college. For example, I knew a young woman who'd gotten a patent on a thermodynamics invention and wasn't really interested in doing anything with it. This technology she now had the exclusive right to use or license to other people for a period of years. That's what a patent is. She'd just done all of that work to get into college, and apparently it had worked. Could tell you what they'd achieved, but not so much about whether any of it mattered to them. They were studying STEM or headed toward medicine or economics or law because they were supposed to, because it would lead to the future someone else had in mind for them. I knew too many pre-meds biding their time until they could find the courage to tell their parents they didn't actually want to be a doctor, which was a time they imagined would come only once they had the MD degree. And all of these students I'm thinking of as I say this were far more interesting to look at on paper than to talk with in person. And of course, I felt sorry for them as well. Once sat in my office, tears streaming down her face because her parents chose every class, every extracurricular, every summer internship, all in furtherance of medical school, which they had in mind for her. She had a 4.0 GPA at Stanford, quite an accomplishment, and was a fragile shell of a human holding her exquisite parts together. I found myself thinking over the years, was any of this stuff really their passion? Or was passion just something someone, let's face it, everyone said they had to discover? Find your passion, quick, because colleges want to see it. Find your passion by November 1st if you're applying early. Like it's hiding on a bookshelf, and if they just search hard enough, they can find their passion and show it to someone. Most of us had not figured out our passion by the end of high school. That thing that becomes our path, our purpose, the answer to the question, why do you do what you do? Passion? No, most of us, we figured it out after high school, maybe in college, maybe grad school, maybe the workplace, where you learn as much about what you don't want to do as what you do want to do. But nowadays, it has somehow become normal to expect teenagers to be able to answer this question before they ever leave their childhood home, before they're old enough to really know much of anything about themselves, let alone what's out there in the world. They can be prodded to find an answer, coached to say what impresses people. And yeah, they'll do all that work that ends up looking like passion, particularly when they do so much of it. And all that achievement takes a lot of help. Help parents are eager to give, tracking their homework, keeping track of their deadlines, arguing with somebody when the deadline is missed and needs to be extended. So my point was, all of this achievement students have done, by the time they get to college, it takes a lot of help, and parents are still these days providing that help, even when the kid is in college. And so just as in high school, keeping track of homework and deadlines, just as in high school, arguing with teachers and principals who become professors and deans, and advocating for their kid when a deadline is missed or when there's a roommate problem, parents in the college level are even going so far as to still wake their child up in the morning with a phone call. I know, some of you are like, no, and some of you are like, yeah, I could see myself doing that. Because the stakes are so high in college, they can't possibly miss a class. Okay. And my colleagues and I, whose job was to help young people unfold into their adult selves, which is a process that can be ugly before it is beautiful. My colleagues and I could see that parents doing so much for kids and telling them what to do all the time were denying their kids the chance to grow competent, confident, to master something through hard work on their own over time. My job as dean was to care about them, who they knew themselves to be, what they wanted from their life, not to care about what others expected them to be and expected of them. I began to wonder about too many students. Did they have a sense of self even starting to bud within them? Or were they in fact content to have their parents plan out a life for them and assist with every step of that life for them? Did they think a B really was failure? And why did it strike them like an unrecoverable blow when it came? Could they have their own ideas, strike out on their own towards something new? Or were they just incredibly good at doing as they were told? Incredibly good at meeting parents' expectations. It worried me. It angered me. And then soon enough, I made the very mortifying discovery that I was on track to being one of those parents one day. You see, I was obsessed with my kids always going to the right schools, beginning with nursery school. We came home from the hospital, Stanford Hospital, with our firstborn child, Sawyer. I'd had a C-section, so I was moving a bit gingerly. But when we made our way home, when he was 5 days old, I said to my husband, honey, can you go find the application for Bing Nursery School? It's in a pile on my desk. I'd had it for at least 18 months. But it required a name of the child and a birth date. You couldn't submit it when your kid was in utero. So I said to my husband, you gotta find the form. You know, you gotta fill out his name and his birth date. I had already filled in the rest. And then we needed to get back in the car and drive back down to Palo Alto, which then was about a 25, 30-minute drive, and turn it in. because, I didn't want to ruin my son's chances of getting into the right nursery school. Sawyer went off to Bing at age 2, and 2 years later, his little sister Avery went there. And one day when Avery was 4, I was picking her up. It was a Wednesday, that was my pickup day. And her teacher pulled me aside and said, "Julie, do you have time to look at what Avery did today in school?" And I thought to myself, how interesting can it be? I work with college students, this is just nursery school. But I kept that to myself, and outwardly I smiled and said, "Yes." And the teacher walked me over to a table filled with 12 to 15 small white canvases, about this big, painted in watercolor with a Q-tip, okay? Avery had done 12 to 15 of these that day, and my first thought, you know what my first thought was? Where am I gonna put all of this art? But I kept that thought to myself as the teacher began to explain to me that it was unusual to see a child so young cover the entire canvas with paint. And I smiled, and I nodded, and I tried my best to look like I cared. But inside I was thinking, yeah, but that's just art. It's not gonna get her into Stanford. And by that time, we had bought a dilapidated house in Palo Alto by combining the sale of my mother's house in Massachusetts with the sale of our Bay Area starter home. 2 houses combined to sell one dilapidated to buy one in Palo Alto, so our kids could attend one of the very best public high schools in the land, Henry M. Gunn. And we were on top of every piece of homework, every deadline, every moment of our kids' lives. We were tying their shoes when they were more than old enough to do it for themselves. Watching over their every moment at the park, in the yard, in the house, cutting their meat. I was cutting Sawyer's meat when he was 10. And some of you I know are going, so? But no, you need to stop. We were on top of everything. And what I came to realize when I started paying attention to what I was doing in my house with my kids is that while every parent wants their kids to be successful, if we're the type of parent who has some extra time and money on our hands, and we feel we can and should try to control things and engineer outcomes for them, and when we feel we have the right to question the authority of the adults in their lives, and when we feel a little better about ourselves and our family when our kids are achieving at the highest levels, well, we're willing to do whatever it takes to ensure that our kids do in fact succeed moment to moment. And while we mean so very, very well, we've inadvertently constructed what I call the checklisted childhood. And I believe this checklisted childhood is at the heart of why so many of our children across the nation are struggling with mental health issues. The checklisted childhood is one where parents are afraid of parks and playgrounds and sidewalks and bees, both the animal and the academic kinds, where we schedule play in the calendar, but not just that. We watch over it to make sure it's always enriching and everyone's always taking turns and always getting along. And where we stand on the sidelines of their overscheduled lives and we're constantly obsessively vigilant over grades and scores and homework. Accordingly, everything is safe, selected, chosen, recommended, planned, decided, approved, improved, done, accomplished, handled, coached, figured out, erased, rewritten, fixed, arranged, solved, resolved, absolved, shaped, designed, orchestrated, and dreamed for them. And we keep them safe and sound and fed and watered. We want them at the right school. How many of your kids, our kids, how many of the kids here have heard a parent say, "We live here, we moved here, we got this house here, we came all this way, we sacrificed all this and that so you could go to this school"? Raise your hand if you've heard someone else say that to their kids. The implicit message being, don't screw it up, kid. A lot is riding on this. Don't let us down. This language we think is motivating can be crippling. And it's not just about kids being in the right school. We want our kids in the right classes at the right school. And not just the right classes, we want to be sure they're getting the right grades in the right classes at the right school. 6th grade math feels like it determines their entire future, maybe even earlier here. So there are the visits with tutors or specialists or experts designed to try to ensure those right grades are gotten. Or it's us sitting there night after night as they do that homework, making sure not only that it's done, but that it's correct. And too often we correct it, or sometimes do a portion of it for them, more interested in them getting the top grade than in whether they're learning. And it's not just the grades and the checklist of childhood, it's the scores and the endless hours of test prep on evenings and weekends that go into getting those scores. And it's not just the grades and the scores, it's the accolades and the awards and the sports and the activities and the leadership. Don't just join a club, honey. We say, maybe you could start a club because colleges want to see it. And community service. Check the box to show them you care about others, preferably very far away. And all of this is done to some hoped-for degree of perfection, a degree of perfection that most of us was never held to as a child. Is what we expect humanly possible for a small few number of kids? Yeah. But for most, no, it's not. It's too much for most. All of this in the checklist of childhood, all that they must do to be worthy of something someday makes them feel a sense of helplessness over their future. Kids, our kids are begging for us to put a lid on it, to say, all of this stuff you're doing, it's good, it's enough. But we don't say that because we're desperately afraid it's not enough. It's never enough. Not with those big brand name schools raising the bar every year. So to try to ensure our kids achieve this all but impossible to reach degree of perfection, well, we'll check that SIS portal weekly, daily, hourly. We'll argue with teachers and principals, coaches and referees. We'll get that AP limit overridden. If there is one, we'll get them on the travel soccer team, hoping for that scholarship will act as our kids' concierge or secretary to bring them what they need, keep track of their deadlines, get deadlines extended, do whatever it takes to improve the child in front of us. And then after school and in the evenings and on weekends in our homes with our kids, we're constantly nudging, cajoling, hinting, helping, haggling, nagging, arguing, as the case may be to sure they're not screwing up, we say, not closing doors, not ruining their future, some hoped-for admission to a handful of colleges that presently deny almost every applicant. Right? You recognize any of that? I know you do. That's why I'm here. In communities like yours and mine, and in many other places around the country, as I've discovered, where there are parents who invest in trying to really be there in every conceivable way for our kids, this is what it can look and feel like. We are constantly there doing everything and every little thing for them. And in the checklist of childhood, well, here's how it can feel to be a child. They can't play freely. There's no room in their afternoons. The United Nations says the right to play freely is a right of every child. And we tend to think the UN exists to protect those whose human rights are being violated somewhere far away. And it does. But the right to play freely is being abrogated right here, because we see play as frivolous, not conducive to developing that passion or getting into the right college. Instead of letting our kids play freely, we put them in a cage of enrichment, as if every activity, every quiz, every piece of homework is somehow a make or break moment for their future, as if every single afternoon must be harnessed for utility or else it is wasted. In the checklist of childhood, our kids aren't getting enough sleep, which pediatricians in my community, don't know about yours, are screaming at us to pay attention to. We've decided as long as they're getting their homework done, checking off the items on the checklist, well, sleep can be deferred for a later time, like when they're 24 and they've already gotten the degree from the right college. And then they enter high school, and instead of asking, wow, what activities sound cool or fun, they ask advisors, what activities do I need to do to get into the right college? And as high school grades start to come in, if they're getting B's or, God forbid, C's, they frantically text a close trusted friend, has anyone ever gotten into a good college with the grades I just got? In the checklist of childhood, we often say in our heads and to our friends, oh, I just want them to be happy. But when they get home from school or we get home from work, all too often the first thing on our minds is their grades, because we've checked them. or their homework. Do you have any homework? How much homework do you have? When are you starting your homework? Have you finished your homework? And then we run alongside them with clucking praise like a trainer at the Westminster Dog Show. We just picture it, okay? We're coaxing them to just jump a little farther, just soar a little higher, day after day after day. And they see in our faces that our approval of them, that our love, and maybe their very worth as humans comes from getting A's, and that their worth is diminished if they're not getting the best grades. Palo Alto's superintendent has said there's an SAT score in the 99th percentile nationally that's only in the 75th percentile at Gunn, where my kids go. I'm sure the same can be said here. So kids who compete extremely well with kids around the nation feel mediocre in their own school, in their own town, which demands perfection. Wonder how every other kid feels. A kid has a sign above his desk in his bedroom, 2400, 836. A kid is hospitalized for suicidal ideation after texting friends about unbearable pressure from a parent. And the parent comes to that hospital with the applications he wants to be sure she fills out while she's there. And even in death, they are not free. A child takes his life, and his obituary includes his very high ACT score. What are we doing? What are we doing to our kids? Our precious kids. I live very close to my kids' high school, and I see them biking to and from, and they look like factory workers facing a very hard day of labor, except on those 7 or 8 days a year when there's a minimum day before a holiday, and they bike back home from Gunn High School with gorgeous smiles on their faces. And there's a lightness about them, and I hear their laughter. They are in that moment contemplating no homework for even just a few days. They are uncaged, they are free, they are kids. There's no doubt that we parents think the checklisted childhood is worth it. We speak, many of us, as if they literally won't have a future unless we push them in these ways, all geared toward admission to a small number of colleges. But wait, the evidence is everywhere, all around us, in this community, in this very room, that successful, happy people didn't all go to big brand name colleges. Successful, happy people went to a state school, went to a community college, a small college no one has heard of, or didn't go to college at all. If I'm speaking about you, you matter. Yeah, you matter too, although this community mindset, that brand when it comes to college is all that matters, can make you feel unseen. You can applaud if I'm referring to you and your background. With the evidence all around us that successful, happy people came from all kinds of schooling backgrounds, I think maybe we just fear our kids won't have a future we can brag about to friends and with stickers on the backs of our cars. Because our kids have become our accomplishment, the indicator of our worth, the proof that we are still achieving something. Parenting. It's like we think of our child as a little bonsai tree that we can put in the ceramic pot with the right dirt and moisture and nutrients and sunlight, and we'll clip it and prune it and clip it and prune it to resemble the ideal shape of a kid. And then we'll parade it around to our friends in its lovely pot and say, look at my kid, my masterpiece, look at what I've done. And many of our kids emerge from all this clipping and pruning looking like the perfect little bonsai tree, a perfect replica of a real human. But there's something about this childhood that is doing something harmful to many of them. According to the 2013 study of the American College Health Association, which surveyed 100,000 college students on 153 campuses. Okay, now that's all the 100,000 college students on 153 campuses. That's all the schools, colleges you have in mind for your kids, and about 133 more. Of these 100,000 college students in every tier, reporting back on their mental and physical health over the last year, 84.3% reported having been overwhelmed by all they had to do. 60.5% were very sad. 57% were very lonely. 51.3% felt overwhelming anxiety. 46.5%, just fewer than 1 in 2, felt things were hopeless. Remember, this was from kids all over, East, West, North, South, Midwest, public, private, large, medium, small, colleges and universities, tiers 1, 2, and 3. We've somehow made childhood toxic for children. Here's what's happening. By hovering so closely over the minutia, the minutes, the moments of their childhood, by living right up inside their developing minds all the time, always concerned with whether they've done something or how it went or why it didn't go better, and then stepping into plan, nudge, nag, handle it, sort it out, fix it, it sends our kids this horrible message. Hey kid, I don't think you can do any of this without me. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It prevents our children from developing self-efficacy, a foundational tenet of psychology, the core understanding that one's own actions lead to outcomes. One's own actions, not one's parents' actions on one's behalf, must lead to outcomes to develop self-efficacy. If Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, self-efficacy is kind of I do, therefore I am. I know I exist because my actions have outcomes. Doesn't matter whether the outcomes are good or bad. To develop self-efficacy, we just need, all of us need, and our kids as well, to see the causality. And the bad things we parents fear, failure, falling, flailing, floundering, fumbling, these are 5 beautiful F words. They are some of life's essential teachers. Without experiencing failure, our kids are afraid of it, averse to risk-taking, won't stray outside their comfort zone, which is where humans grow. They lack the rudder of strength that would reassure them when they do fall or fail that they have what it takes to get back up and continue. While we're so busy constructing their perfect path for them and marching them down it, we're depriving our sons and daughters of the chance to be. B-E, italics, to be their own selves. And as research is starting to show, this undermining of self-efficacy is at least in part contributing to the increased rates of anxiety and depression in teens and young adults. Simply put, to develop self-efficacy, which they must, it's essential to their wellness, unlike APs, GPAs, and test scores. To develop self-efficacy, our kids need to spend a whole lot of time figuring things out, trying, fumbling, learning, and experiencing life for themselves. It's not just our kids who are hurting. This childhood is toxic for us, too. Too many of us are spending our lives scheduled to the hilt between work and home, homework and homeroom, practice tests and practice fields, trying to keep up with the judgmental Joneses. Ours is an endless shuffle to a rehearsal, a practice, a tutoring session, an expert of some kind designed to make our kid better at something. We're on autopilot in our minivans, going through the motions, making the snacks, being on the committees, arguing with the teachers and coaches, dropping them off at Kumon, serving as the personal, serving as, it's so fun for me to listen to when do audiences laugh. Serving as the personal assistant who handles their very complex, busy lives, criticizing our spouse's behavior or withering under our spouse's expectations, and vaguely wondering when we might get off the sidelines of someone else's practice and start living a bit of our own life again. No wonder so many young adults are failing to launch, as the media likes to say. We've made adulthood look so very unattractive. We've shown them that all adults do is worry constantly about kids and stand on the sidelines of their lives with our coffee drinks. Yes, our morning medication is caffeine, and our evening medication is right there with you. I live an hour and a half south of Napa. In Atlanta, they told me it was bourbon, by the way. And imagine a whole room full of people all at once saying bourbon. And long, long gone are the days of a parent throwing open a back door, a front door, and saying, get out there and play, I'll call you for dinner. Who remembers that? Raise your hand. Raise it so high that in the darkness we can see each other. There are no wide open doors or afternoons for that matter, and no one's home to play with. There's no time for that. There's no room in the afternoon. There's only the schedule and the drop-off and the pickup and maybe another drop-off and pickup and then some semblance of that family dinner we're supposed to have according to the experts. And then the homework. All that homework until some set of us plus them is exhausted. Sleep. Repeat. Many of us remember our own freer childhoods, lived not all that long ago, and we fantasize about a different, saner, happier life for our kids and ourselves, perhaps elsewhere, like Wyoming. Or just outside the Beltway, a little bit more outside the Beltway. Yet we look over our shoulder and we see the galloping herd of other parents who are constantly hovering over their kids, cultivating them like precious little bonsai trees, doing every little thing for them, spending more money, hiring more tutors, taking more time off just to ensure their kid makes the grade, makes the cut, gets admitted to that school over our kid, outright doing their kids' homework for them, bragging about their kids' outcomes. We want to trust our instincts, be brave and opt out, focus on family time, not test prep, incite some laughter in our homes once again, and fewer tears. Let our kids just occasionally be kids. But we fear the herd and the short-term win their kid will achieve with all of that parental help. Even when we know better. The overparenting herd is like a bully we feel the need to go along with, lest we be hurt by it even further. How can we stop overhelping with our kids' homework? If we let them submit it as is, our kid will be competing with every other kid's parents. Now, am I saying all kids are motivated hard workers and don't need parental guidance and involvement and we should just back off and drink wine? No. I'm saying our purpose as parents isn't to go to all lengths to ensure our kids get into some subset of the quote-unquote right colleges, but to try to ensure that they have the skills, the habits, the wellness, so that they can be successful wherever they go. Things built, thank you. Things built from love and chores. Really. You see, I know some of you are going to flip out when you hear this. I know I did. One of the longest longitudinal studies of humans ever conducted, the Harvard Grant Study, studied humans over the years of their life from college age until they passed away, whenever that came. It's had 4 different directors. It's been around for 70 years. This study found that professional success in life comes not from having attended Harvard, but from having done chores as a child. And the earlier the kids started, the better. Woohoo! Some of you were like, yes. And some of you were like, oh no. Okay, being able to roll up your sleeves and pitch in, being willing to do the unpleasant tasks, being interested in contributing one's effort to the betterment of the whole, learning responsibility and accountability, that's what gets you ahead in the working world. But with our kids oh so busy with the items on the checklist, often we absolve them from having to do any of the work around the house. How many of you know the work of the psychologist and author Wendy Mogul? She wrote The Blessing of a Skin Knee and The Blessing of a B-. Wendy, I heard her speak about a year ago, and she said, kids today are like benevolent dictators. When dinner is over and we're just about to say, will you help me with the all a kid has to say, I have a test tomorrow, and we're more likely to serve them some kind of motivational dessert right at their laptop. Okay, honey. Okay, then insist that they help us with the dishes, and they become young adults in the workforce still waiting to be served, lacking the impulse, the instinct to look around and see how can I be, and ask themselves, how can I be useful, to anticipate what their boss might need. The Harvard Grant Study also found that happiness in life, so chores goes with professional success, happiness equals love, not love of work, love of humans. Partners, spouses, kids, family, friends, relationships, connection equals love, equals happiness. Our kids need to be loved unconditionally in our homes so they can love themselves and then go out into the world and have the capacity to love and be loved. Now, we can show them unconditional love every day or not. For example, when we see them at the end of the day, whether they're coming home from school or we're coming home from work, We need to put down our technology. We need to shut the laptop and put the tablet to the side. I'm still holding mine because the flashlight is now shining in your eyes as I do this. Okay. We have to put down our technology and look them in the eye and let our son or our daughter see the joy that fills our faces when we're seeing our precious offspring. Sure, we're dying to know how they did on that math test, or if we've already checked, we want to know why they got that, A minus or B or C. But instead of assaulting them as we see them for the first time with those questions, just think, how many of us would want to come home at the end of the day, if you work outside the home, and have someone say, how was work today? Were you more successful than yesterday? Are you going to work harder tomorrow? What happened at that meeting? Instead of asking our kids the equivalent of that the minute they get home, the minute we see them, we need to ask them, hi, honey, how was your day? What was good about today? And here's the key, and it's hard. We need to take an interest in whatever they actually say. And sometimes my 14-year-old daughter, she's like, what was good about today? Lunch. And I'm thinking, academically, what was good about your day? You got to take an interest in lunch, because then you're talking to your kid, and maybe 10 or 15 minutes in, you can steer it to the academic stuff that's on your mind, or maybe you can not for one day and see what happens. They want to know they matter to us, that their interests matter to us. They want to feel loved just as we do for who they are, not because of some accomplishment or GPA. But what about college, you're thinking? Chores and love may sound all well and good, but come on now, colleges want to see the highest grades and scores, accolades, and awards, right? I'm going to say, well, it's true that the colleges with the biggest brand names, they want that, at least for now, until they come up with a better way, and I believe they will. In fact, that new report out from Harvard's Graduate School of Education last month, Turning the Tide, it came out in January, has been signed on to by admissions officers at about 80 prestigious schools. Okay, it strongly advocates admissions reform. It's not anti-rigor. It's asking, look what it seems to take to impress a college today versus 20 years ago. 20 years ago, today. Will it be reasonable to expect most kids to have taken 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 APs? Most kids? Will that be reasonable one day? This report is promising. I predict things could be quite different in as few as 5 years. Not in time for my two, unfortunately. We're raising kids in the meantime, in the now, where we have kids to raise who need a dinner tonight and who'll need breakfast tomorrow. And contrary to what the college rankings racket would have us believe, there are an enormous number of fantastic colleges to choose from, not 20. In some countries, yes, there are 1 or 2 or 3 schools you have to get into, or else you'll have no professional chances there. That is simply not true here in the US, where there are 2,800 accredited four-year schools. Whereas with anything, the top 5% are magnificent. That's 140 colleges and universities, all selective, all with strong faculty, all offering a fantastic education, all with strong alumni networks. Those college guidebooks that rank 100, 200, 250 schools, those are all top schools in a system that has 2,800. Take an interest in so many more of them. Successful, happy people went to all of them. If we as parents could just widen the blinders we wear a little bit and get our egos out of it, look at the evidence of who's successful and happy all around us, who we respect, where they didn't go to school or did, we could see that it's true. In order to help your kid make a good college choice, I'm going to let you in on a secret that everyone in academia already knows. You get a great college education where the faculty have the time and interest in teaching and mentoring undergraduates. Where does this happen? Small colleges no one has heard of, community colleges. But at big universities, public or private, a faculty member's purpose is to conduct research and publish their work. It's how they're hired and promoted. It's why universities exist, to discover and disseminate new knowledge. We're glad they do it. It's an essential function in our society. Some faculty at universities are also interested in teaching and mentoring undergraduates, but many can't find the time, or frankly, some don't have the interest. This is why we stress on campus visits to universities that you should ask, how many of my classes will be taught by faculty as opposed to a grad student TA? Small classes taught by faculty are the key to a fantastic undergraduate education. It leads to a deeper comprehension of the material, higher grades, stronger letters of recommendation for what comes next. Now, keeping that in mind, here's some evidence that supports you in widening your blinders just a tad so you can see a few less well-known schools. For the many students who do have the grades and scores that put them in the running at the biggest brand name schools, and yet they get denied because tens of thousands of others do too, no matter, research shows that kids who had the grades and scores to go to the most highly selective place and went somewhere else had an income 20 years later that was no different from those who had gone there. That's research from guys named Kruger and Dale. It boils down to this: it's not the school that makes the difference, it's the kid. Malcolm Gladwell has said that to get that precious faculty attention, it's actually best for a student to go one tier below the best college they got into so they can be assured of being the top student there. Because it's the top students at every college, regardless of tier, who get that precious faculty attention. It's called simply being the big fish in the small pond. You might be thinking, well, employers in grad schools, they want applicants from big brand names. In some industries, like management consulting and finance, it's true, but even there, it's starting to change. Deloitte UK recently announced that looking at the brand name an applicant attended made them confuse polish with potential to do the work. And they've decided to stop looking at the brand name applicants for employment attended. The head of HR at Google, Laszlo Bock, says he doesn't care much about Ivy League credentials or a sterling college transcript, says it's one of the flaws in how we assess people. He says, we assume that if you went to Harvard, Stanford, or MIT that you're smart. We assume that if you got good grades, you'll do well at work. But there's no relationship between where you went to school and how you did 5, 10, 15 years into your career, he says. So we here at Google, we stopped looking at it. Frank Bruni's recent book, New York Times columnist Frank Bruni, Where You'll Go Is Not Who You'll Be, cites a study of 550 American CEOs and nonprofit leaders and found that almost 2/3 attended schools not in any way considered elite, let alone the biggest brand names. Harvard Law School's graduating class this year has 540 students, and they came from 171 different colleges. And Teach for America is the second largest employer of college grads in this country. They take 5,900 new core members each year, most recently took from 800 different colleges. So how much more evidence do we need that you can go anywhere and everywhere and be successful? We parents just need more information on the many other magnificent colleges out there, and we need to get that information to our kids. For starters, there are better lists. 2 better lists that I have in mind. Both come in book form and they have a website. The first is Colleges That Change Lives. Who's heard of it? Anyone? Woo! ctcl.org, Colleges That Change Lives. 40 very small residential colleges where the faculty are completely devoted to teaching students. And the students emerge intellectually and professionally enriched, and personally enriched and set up well for the professions. And they are far more likely to go on to grad school than are the students at big brand name places. And they're called that, this list of them, because when Lauren Pope, the former New York Times education editor, did his research, the alumni at these places uniformly said, this place changed my life. That's what we want for our kids. Colleges That Change Lives is a great list. Another better list is the Alumni Factor, alumnifactor.com, which looked at alumni at 225 schools and rates them on everything from net worth to happiness to intellectual development to friendships. It's a goldmine of information on how alumni actually fare out in the world, as well as their political and social beliefs. I know it isn't easy to set aside an expectation, let alone an obsession with big brand name colleges. It wasn't easy for me. I could talk about it to a lot of people, but I didn't yet believe it in my bones until I was doing research for my book, wherein I got a huge reality check on the odds of admission to those places I had in mind for Sawyer and Avery, and a reality check about what it was doing to my family dynamic to be so obsessed with that. I was speaking with an admissions officer at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. Who's heard of Smith? Woo! It sits very near Amherst, UMass Amherst, Hampshire, and Mount Holyoke. And yes, I did that on purpose. Just to hear someone mentioning the names of places helps widen the blinders. In a few years, you might say, well, now Julie mentioned Hampshire. Maybe I could consider that for my child. Yes, okay? So I'm talking to an admissions officer at Smith named Sidonia Sid Dalby. And Sid gives talks in her community about applying to college, and ultimately the talk gets to where do people think they want to apply or want their kids to apply. And she hears the names of big brand name schools from the members of her audience, and she tries to help them understand the odds with this analogy. She says, folks, if there's a 5 to 10% chance of rain, do you take an umbrella? Do you take a raincoat? Say it louder. No. How come? Say it with me. It's not gonna rain or happen. Okay, so see where Sid's going? There's a 5 to 10% chance of admission at these big brand name places right now. Yet we steer our kids' childhoods toward that outcome, however improbable it may be. Sid's analogy about rain helped me finally understand that those odds are not in any kid's favor. It's very Hunger Games-esque, actually. I'm not saying don't apply to those places. I'm not saying they're not great schools. I'm just saying they're not the only great schools, by far. I'm saying if it comes through for your kid and your kid wants to go there, be happy, like, wow, that happened. But don't make your kid feel like they've disappointed you or have failed at life if they don't beat those odds. Tens of thousands of qualified kids will not beat those 90 to 95% denial odds. And I got another huge reality check on big brand name school admission when a rigorous course load at Gunn High School became too much for my own son. In his sophomore year, in the fall, Sawyer was doing about 5 hours of homework a night. And we gasped just like that and thinking, oh, help us, because the horrendous junior year, which we've all already given over to torture, is not yet upon us. This is only the sophomore year. It's not supposed to be that bad. His eyes were red in the mornings, rubbing them. He'd lost kind of the energy, the spring in his step. We watched him try to catch up on the weekends, just keep his head above water, and about 3 weeks into this, I looked over his shoulder at the computer one night at about 11:30. He was still up. And of course, we hadn't gone to bed. We're not going to bed. Our kid is still up doing his homework. Like, this whole system is broken. And I look over his shoulder and I see he's not even doing his Spanish homework. Spanish 3 was one of his classes. Google Translate is doing his Spanish homework for him, okay? And he's also got honors chem and algebra 2 trig and fancy history and fancy English and a couple other fancy classes. So I turned to my husband, I said, what are we gonna do? Sawyer's suffering. Like, there's no room, this is bad. And we were thinking, can we let him drop a class? Like, what's gonna happen to his future if he drops a class? You're laughing, but you would be thinking that too, some of you. So we agreed, though, we needed to ask him if he needed to drop a class. And I went to him at his bedside that night. By this point, it was midnight. And I walked into my son's room, and I knelt down, and I said, baby, this looks like it's just way too much. It looks like you're really suffering. We've seen you try to catch up. We've seen you work really hard. Do you think you might need to drop a class? And my sweet son looked up at me and said, can I? Don't you want this for me? Don't I have to? And I said, sweetheart, in some theoretical universe, we wanted you to have access to all of these great classes at this magnificent school. And inside I'm thinking, we bought this house here, we moved here, it's like. But thankfully I didn't say that. Theoretically, we care about that, but what matters more than any of that is you and your suffering. Do you think you might need to drop a class? And just being seen by us in his struggle brought a bit of my son back to me that night. The next day at breakfast, he came downstairs, he said, Mom, I think I might need to drop a class, and I think it might need to be Spanish. And I said, yeah, I had that sense. But we're not gonna be the ones to go have this conversation for our kid. We prepped him on how to have a respectful, thoughtful conversation with his guidance counselor, who very predictably said, but Sawyer, you can't drop Spanish. Why? Because colleges wanna see it. And my son said, colleges wanna see language proficiency, often demonstrated by 3 years of study, and I don't think I'm gonna impress them with this D I'm probably gonna get. And if I drop this class, I'll have one fewer class assigning work, one more hour in the day in which to do work, and I can focus on the honors chemistry that is my love, and Algebra 2, Trig, and History, and Fancy English, and the other 2 classes. And he dropped the class, and we got our son back. I've realized slowly, the hard way, thanks in part to working with so many of other people's kids, that my children are not bonsai trees, that they're wildflowers. And that my job is to take an interest in who they actually are and what they're good at and what they love and support them in being that self. I'm no longer letting the college ranking system dictate how I raise my children. I'm freeing them from a tyrannical checklist that leaves them feeling that their worth as humans is their grades and scores. I'm giving them more autonomy and control, and yes, chores. And I've learned to check my ego. The college they attend, their major, their career, their income, that's up to them. My daughter, Avery, she's an artist. Yeah, she's gonna have to figure out how to pay the bills one day. But it's my job to create an expectation that she can. And my son Sawyer is in love with biology at the molecular level, literally. Already knows he wants to do a PhD in genetics. And his decision to drop Spanish may mean some of the best colleges don't want him, my incredibly intellectually curious, bright, hardworking child. And I don't care. The right college, yes. The right college for Sawyer will not only accept that he made that decision, they might applaud it. When we parents truly believe, not just say, but believe that our kid can get a great education at hundreds of places, a better education if they go to a place where faculty actually make time to teach and mentor them, well, then we can bring a deep sigh of relief to our kitchens and dining tables and the bedsides in our children's rooms, because there's room at all of these colleges for our kids. We can return childhood to children. We can return to our focus on nurturing these little humans to be responsible and accountable, to be kind to others. We can let them scramble a bit, tumble, fall, learn, and get back up and try again. We can let them sleep, breathe, and shape themselves into their own human, not a little bonsai tree. And when we, their parents, let them do that, well, they'll get into college on their own volition and desire, and they'll have what it takes to actually thrive there, wherever they go, and be good community members and good citizens, people we can be proud of, their glorious wildflower selves. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Community Keynotes, How to Raise an Adult, with Julie Lythcott-Haims, presented by the Safe Community Coalition. For more information on the Community Keynotes series or other great programs from the Fairfax Network, please visit the Fairfax Network website.